4:51 a.m. Persian Gulf, 28 nautical miles southwest of Abu Musa Island. 10 Iranian IRGCN fast attack boats opened fire simultaneously. Warning shots raking across the bow and stern of USS Laboon from 3 separate bearings, muzzle flashes visible across the dark water in all directions. The rounds hit the surface 90 meters ahead of the ship's bow and 60 meters behind the stern. The crew had no warning, no prior radio contact, no escalation sequence. They went from routine patrol to incoming fire in under 4 seconds. What happened next? And what the commanding officer chose to do in the 90 seconds between the first shots and the second volley became one of the most studied close-quarters decision records in U.S. Navy surface warfare history. Welcome to Navy Poverline, where we break down the moments when training ends and reality begins. And the outcomes depend entirely on what commanders do in the seconds nobody can plan for. The Persian Gulf in the pre-dawn hours is a specific environment that surface warfare officers spend significant time learning, and experienced sailors never fully stop respecting. The water is warm, flat in the early morning, and black in a way that coastal waters closer to populated shores rarely are. The radar picture in that stretch of the Gulf, the corridor between the UAE coastline and the Iranian island of Abu Musa, is routinely crowded with commercial traffic, fishing vessels, and the constant background hum of IRGCN patrol activity that has defined the region for 4 decades. A surface warfare coordinator monitoring that picture on any given night is tracking dozens of contacts simultaneously, assigning threat priorities, correlating with known IRGCN patrol patterns, and building a picture that is never fully clean. That complexity is not accidental. The IRGCN has operated in this specific corridor for 20 years with a deliberate doctrine of presence saturation, maintaining enough surface activity at all times that any individual contact is difficult to isolate as specifically threatening until it is already close. They know how the American watch process works. They know the assessment timelines. They know the difference between a contact that will generate an immediate response and a contact that will be logged and monitored while the watch officer works through 10 other tracks simultaneously. 10 fast attack boats that had individually appeared as low-threat surface contacts over the preceding 2 hours were not 10 fast attack boats in the tactical picture aboard USS Laboon at 0451. They were background until they weren't. The intelligence picture for that night had not been empty. A classified overhead assessment produced 36 hours prior had flagged elevated IRGCN activity in the Abu Musa corridor. Specifically, an increased tempo of small boat departures from the Iranian-controlled island's harbor over a 12-hour window. The assessment had categorized this as consistent with increased patrol tempo, possibly related to scheduled exercises. The pattern had been observed before in the same area during Iranian naval exercise periods. The previous instances had produced harassment activity, but no weapons fire. The categorization was reasonable. It was also incomplete, because it failed to account for one specific factor. The 10 boats that had departed Abu Musa's harbor over the preceding 2 hours had not dispersed into their standard patrol patterns. They had been holding position, spread across a 14 nautical mile arc, moving slowly in patterns designed to look like individual patrol drift, rather than a coordinated holding formation. The coordination was real. The appearance was designed. At 0443, the 10 boats began a simultaneous slow convergence, each one adjusting its drift course by 10 to 15 degrees toward Laboon's position, speed remaining below 8 knots to avoid triggering the watch officer's speed change alert threshold. The convergence at that speed took 8 minutes to close from the outer arc of their holding positions to within firing range. 8 minutes. Laboon's surface warfare coordinator had logged 4 of the 10 contacts as having adjusted their drift patterns at 0445. The report noted the adjustments, but did not trigger an alert because speed had not changed, and the individual course shifts were within the noise band of normal drift variation for small vessels in light current conditions. The other 6 contacts had not yet been individually flagged when the first volley fired at 0451. The simultaneous fire from 3 separate bearings, forward port, forward starboard, and aft starboard, was not accidental geometry. It was designed to produce maximum disorientation. In the standard escalation of force decision process, a surface commander who receives warning shots from a single bearing has a clear threat axis and a clear response orientation. A commander who receives simultaneous fire from 3 separate bearings in the dark has 3 threat axes, an incomplete picture of how many contacts are out there, and a decision process that has to operate in the cognitive white space between what is known and what needs to be known before acting. The IRGCN had designed this to create that white space. Laboon's commanding officer reached the bridge within 40 seconds of the first shots. The duty officer had already initiated general quarters and ordered all weapon mounts to stand by. The ship was at battle stations before the CO arrived. What she walked into was a bridge picture that would have challenged any commander under any circumstances. The radar showed 10 contacts, spread across a 270-degree arc from ahead to aft on both beams, at ranges between 600 and 1,900 meters. 3 of the contacts were the ones that had fired. 7 had not yet fired, but they had not turned away either. All 10 were still closing, slowly, in a movement pattern that the surface warfare coordinator was now reading correctly as a coordinated encirclement. The CO had 90 seconds, the estimated time before the second volley, based on the reload and repositioning tempo she was observing from the active contacts maneuvering, to make 3 decisions simultaneously. The first decision was force posture. She ordered both Mark 38 25mm gun mounts to active tracking mode, assigned specific contacts to each mount, and ordered the aft phalanx CIWS to standby surface engagement mode. She did not authorize fire. She aimed. The second decision was communications. She ordered a full-spectrum broadcast on Channel 16 and military emergency frequencies simultaneously, in English and Farsi, identifying Laboon as a United States Navy warship operating in international waters and stating that any further weapons fire would be met with immediate defensive response. The broadcast was 22 seconds long. It was transmitted twice in succession. The third decision was maneuver. She ordered the helm to come to maximum speed and turn to starboard, putting the ship's bow toward the densest concentration of threats on the forward arc, simultaneously opening the range on the aft contact that had fired, and establishing a heading that could be maintained or modified as the situation developed without closing the range on the forward boats. In 90 seconds, she had done all 3. The second volley came at 04:52 and 47 seconds. Not from the 3 original contacts, but from 2 new contacts on the starboard beam that had not yet fired. 3 round bursts from each boat, impacting the water 45 meters off the starboard side. The rounds were close enough that water spray reached the ship's hull. At that point, the geometry of the engagement had crossed a threshold. Multiple contacts, firing from multiple bearings, rounds impacting within 45 meters of the hull. A ship maneuvering at speed in restricted Gulf waters with 10 armed vessels within 2,000 meters. The legal threshold for defensive fire under U.S. Navy rules of engagement had been met and exceeded. The CO authorized lethal engagement against any contact that fired again or crossed inside 400 meters. She set a clear, specific, publicly communicated threshold, and then she waited 11 seconds. The 11 seconds between her authorized engagement threshold and the next observable IRGCN action were the 11 seconds that determined how many people died that morning. Nothing fired. The 10 contacts maintained their positions. The ones that had fired were not reloading for a third volley. Their crews were watching what Laboon did in response to the second volley. They were reading her. The Mark 38 mounts were tracking. The ship was maneuvering. The CIWS was online. The radio challenge was still being broadcast. The IRGCN controller's voice, captured by the P-8 Poseidon that had been redirected to the area and was now 14 nautical miles north, recording communications, issued an instruction in Farsi. The translation, provided in the post-incident intelligence package, was, "Maintain position, do not fire." The IRGCN controller had looked at what Laboon had done in 90 seconds, aimed, challenged, maneuvered, set a clear engagement threshold, and had decided that the next volley carried a cost he had not fully calculated before the operation began. At 04:55, USS Bulkley, an Arleigh Burke, operating 34 nautical miles to the west, had been ordered to close on Laboon's position at maximum speed. Its radar emissions were visible to the IRGCN contacts within minutes of the order. A second American warship coming at 30 knots changes the geometry of a 10-boat operation designed for one target. At 05:01, the IRGCN controller issued a second instruction. The 10 contacts began pulling back, not turning away, but slowly increasing range, maintaining their spread formation while opening distance from the hull. The movement was deliberate. They were not running. They were departing on their own terms. By 0514, all 10 contacts were outside 4,000 meters. By 0531, they were outside radar range. USS Bulkley arrived at Laboon's position at 0541. The area was clear. The entire incident, from first volley to last IRGCN contact on radar, had lasted 40 minutes. 4 sailors on the starboard bridge wing had been wet from the spray of the second volley's impact at 45 meters. No injuries, no structural damage to the ship, no U.S. rounds fired. On paper, the incident looked like a harassment operation that had been successfully managed. The classified after-action review told a more specific story. The first finding addressed the intelligence failure. The 36-hour-old overhead assessment had categorized the Abu Musa activity as consistent with exercise tempo. The review established that the specific pattern of 10 boats holding a dispersed arc formation in drift mode, which had been present in the radar picture for 2 hours before the attack, was a doctrinal signature that should have been recognized earlier. A table of IRGCN pre-attack behavioral signatures was formally updated to include multi-boat dispersed drift holding in an arc formation as a high indicator rather than a medium one. The update was circulated to all surface warfare commanders in 5th Fleet within 72 hours. The second finding addressed the command decision. The CO's 90-second response was reconstructed in detail. The simultaneous force posture, communications, and maneuver decisions, the 400-meter lethal engagement threshold, the 11-second wait. The review was unambiguous in its assessment. The decision sequence was correct in every element. The 11-second threshold hold, the deliberate pause between authorizing engagement and actually firing, was specifically noted as the decision that preserved the option of de-escalation without surrendering the posture that made de-escalation happen. The review also noted something that did not appear in any official statement. The Mark 38 mount on the forward port position had been tracking the lead firing contact, the boat that had fired the first volley at 0451, continuously from the moment the CO authorized active tracking at 0452. The mount had been on the contact for 4 minutes and 30 seconds when the IRGCN controller ordered his boats to pull back. 4 minutes and 30 seconds of continuous tracking on a contact that was still at 900 meters. The Iranian crew aboard that boat knew they were being aimed at for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The mount was fully visible from their deck. They could see the barrel following them. They did not fire. The third finding was the strategic assessment. The 10-boat simultaneous warning shot operation had required coordination, planning, rehearsal, and command authority above the field level. This was not an improvised harassment. It was an executed doctrine. The IRGCN had developed, rehearsed, and now employed a 10-boat coordinated strike formation, capable of placing simultaneous warning fire across multiple bearings of a target vessel, with no prior radio communication and no observable escalation signal. The doctrine existed. It had been used. It had produced the intended psychological and tactical effect: disorientation, multi-axis threat, disrupted decision-making timeline. It had been defeated on this morning by a commanding officer who had processed it faster than the doctrine assumed she would. That was not a guarantee that the next commanding officer would be faster. The broader strategic question, why this operation, why this morning, was addressed in the intelligence assessment delivered to 5th Fleet 5 days later. The assessment linked the timing to an event 3 days prior. A U.S. Navy destroyer had conducted a freedom of navigation operation within 12 nautical miles of Abu Musa Island, transiting through waters that Iran claims as a 12 nautical mile territorial zone around an island whose sovereignty is disputed between Iran and the UAE. The FUNOP was legal under international law. Iran disputed that. The 10-boat operation at 0451 was Iran's response to a legal navigation operation conducted by a different ship on a different day. The proportionality calculus, a sovereignty claim over a disputed island, answered by a coordinated simultaneous fire operation against a warship that had nothing to do with the original FUNOP, is not one that Western legal frameworks would recognize, but it is the logic Iran operates from. Any U.S. naval action in waters Iran considers controlled is answered with a response calibrated to cost the Americans something without triggering the direct shooting war that neither side is prepared to start on any given morning. The cost that morning was 40 minutes of elevated heart rates and a wet bridge wing. The IRGCN had paid nothing. The 10 boats returned to Abu Musa harbor by 0630. Satellite imagery that afternoon showed them moored in standard positions. No damage. No indication of any operational consequence. The CO of USS Laboon received a formal commendation from the commander, Naval Forces Central Command, for her handling of the engagement. The commendation described her as demonstrating exceptional tactical judgment and command presence under fire. It was not publicly announced. She completed her command tour 6 weeks later and was promoted. The 10 boats were observed departing Abu Musa harbor again 3 weeks after the incident. Their patrol pattern that night was the same dispersed drift arc formation that the updated behavioral signature table now classified as high threat indicator. This time, the watch officer aboard the nearest U.S. surface combatant recognized the pattern within 8 minutes of the boats achieving their holding positions. The destroyer altered course before the convergence could develop. The boats did not fire. That outcome, a threat recognized early enough to maneuver clear without an engagement, is the best possible result in the Gulf. It happens silently. No rounds fired, no wounds treated, no after-action review, no commendation ceremony. The ship just changed course and the boats just went back to their harbor. Those are the nights that nobody talks about. They are also the reason the ones that do get talked about don't end worse. The doctrine that the IRGCN employed at 0451 on that dark Gulf morning was not discarded after it failed to produce a U.S. retreat. It was studied, modified, and refined. The dispersed holding arc, the simultaneous multi-bearing fire, the no radio contact approach, all of it was in the system before that morning and remained in the system after it. The modification came in the timing and the follow-through. Future iterations of the doctrine would compress the time between first volley and second volley. Less time for the defender to orient and respond. Less 11-second window, less margin. That is what doctrine refinement looks like when the result of your first attempt was a destroyer that aimed back at you for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and you decided that was enough for today. It means the next attempt will not give the defender that much time. Stay vigilant, stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.